Well, the man credited with revolutionising how we use technology has died. Steve Jobs was 56. Apple says its visionary co-founder passed away today after a long battle with cancer. The Silicon Valley icon who gave the world the iPod and the iPhone resigned as CEO of the world's largest technology corporation in August, handing the reins to the current chief executive, Tim Cook. Jobs, who fought a rare form of pancreatic cancer, was deemed to be the heart and soul of Apple. He's survived by his wife and 4 children. So Steve Jobs had a rare form of pancreatic cancer. He was diagnosed in 2004 and in 2009 he had a liver transplant. He spoke publicly about the transplant at an Apple product launch in September 2009. That was his first public appearance for almost a year. Let's take a look.
As some of you may know, about 5 months ago I had a liver transplant. So I now have the liver of a mid-20s person who died in a car crash and was generous enough to donate their organs. And I wouldn't be here without such generosity. So I hope all of us can be as generous and elect to become organ donors.
Steve Jobs speaking there back in 2009. I'm joined in the studio now by futurist and technology commentator Mark Pesce. Mark Pesce, welcome. This, just judging by the comments on Twitter and the comments that we're getting on our webpage at the ABC, this seems to have affected people, a lot of people, a lot more than they expected it would.
I think what we're seeing is everyone is just having a pause. I think people are becoming intensely conscious of how much their lives have been affected by the things that Steve Jobs created over his careers. That he basically invented personal computing, at least as we know it. Computers that normal people could buy at normal prices, that was something that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak invented back in 1977. The computer with a mouse and windows on a screen. Okay, yes, it was invented at Xerox, but he was the person who managed to make it cheap enough that everyone could have it, and that's how all computers work today. And then the idea now of a mobile phone that was something more than something you'd make phone calls with, but was actually this incredibly rich device that opened up into all sorts of things that you could do or connect to or play with. That's, again, also him. So 3 different times he's completely reinvented computing and changed all of our expectations of what's possible with a computer.
Now you worked in Silicon Valley yourself, did you?
Yeah.
With Apple?
Yes, I worked at Apple in 1993, and that was a period of time when Jobs wasn't. In 1985, he was basically driven out by the board of Apple because he said we should take Apple in a direction with more Macintoshes, and they said, well, we're making lots of money off of the older computer you invented. Let's keep on doing that. And they parted ways. And so there was a period of time from 85 to 97 when he was outside of Apple. And during that period of time, Apple slowly just lost its direction until by around the time that he was invited back to come and sort of help the company get back on its feet, it was worth just a little over $1 billion. And this is a company that's now worth, I think, what, $400 billion in the years since then. And so when I was there, it was a company that knew it had done great things, but was unable to find within itself new great things to do. And it seems like that was the essential ingredient that he supplied.
Yeah, was it obvious to you back then when you were working for Apple and he wasn't there that he was the element that was missing?
It's an interesting question. I guess you could say that at that period of time, which was sort of the early 1990s, computing wasn't really exciting at all. And we think of computing as actually being rather exciting today, and it was when it began, but it sort of went through this dull phase. And that dull phase does kind of coincide really well with the time when Steve Jobs wasn't there, teasing all of the rest of the industry to think about design, to think about beauty, to think about form and not just function. And I think that's perhaps what it is, that in some sense he's not just sort of an inventor, but he's much more like a Picasso of computing, that he could actually draw something for us and we can see things in a new way because of what he can do.
What was notable about his return to the company in terms of not just the success of the company, but the direction it was heading? How did he remold it?
Well, the very first machine machine that they put out sort of very quickly was what they called the iMac, the integrated Mac, in a color called Bondi Blue. And it was sort of the first time all computers were gray boxes. That's how they were known at the time.
Was this in 97?
97.
Yep.
And all of a sudden you get this thing that sort of looks round and curvy and plastic and kind of glowy and attractive. And it was the first modern computer that you could think of that was like, okay, that's kind of pretty. That kind of doesn't look like it's ugly on my desk. And it became, in a sense, the beginning of a whole series of design revolutions. They came out with the iPod in 2001. Now, people that had music players, they were all horrible. They were all hard to use, hard to get the music on, hard to find the music on. And all of a sudden, the iPod comes along, and it's got this little wheel, and it's very easy for people to use. And so the entire market starts to go that way because people don't want to be taunted. They don't want to be teased by their technology. They want to have a familial relationship with it.
So as well as moulding how things looked and how people could use them, was he a technological genius as well?
I mean, he didn't write software. He didn't know how to design chips. So, and those two, which are what we normally think of as the technology side of things, he always trusted, and he always still does trust, until the very end, very competent people to be able to do that work. And he was also known as being very perfectionist. If you displeased him, if you produced something that he thought was not good enough, he could bring you to tears. And there are plenty of stories of people who had worked for Apple over the years who had been brought to tears by Steve Jobs because he had a vision, he shared that vision with you, and he expected you to be able to execute that vision. And that if you fell short, it was very disappointing.
Was there, how did people feel generally then to work for him? Do you know if there was an atmosphere at Apple at some stages of fear in terms of being one of his employees, or was it there's so much respect that you were kind of keen to please him?
I think it was probably a bit of both. I mean, I think as the years went on, he mellowed somewhat. I mean, he could certainly still have his moments. And there was no design decision at Apple that really did not have his okay. So everything about the way that an iPhone looks or about Macintosh operating system, all of that would have had his stamp on it, either in his vision or he would have said, yes, this is right or this doesn't feel right. So he was, in some sense, customer number one. And he was also, I think, in a sense, the most demanding customer.
What about the future for Apple now?
Well, the thing that may have been his greatest final act was that he seems to have been able to take his understanding and transfer it into the body of the company, that it's not now just about Steve, and it hasn't really, because he's been sick for a little while and he's been stepping away for a while. So the company has made a transition now where they had a product introduction yesterday for the iPhone 4S, and I think that it's probably now going to be known as the iPhone for Steve. And what we'll see is that if he's made that transition, well, then that idea, that creativity, that focus on design and function and beauty being one thing is now inside the organization. So it's a corporate ideal, not just the vision of one person.
Yeah, it is kind of Apple, isn't it?
It's the ethos.
It's the ethos, yeah.
It's the ethos of Apple. It's the thing that makes Apple different. And thank goodness for it, because if we didn't have that, mobile phones would still be ugly and hard to use.
Okay. Well, Mark Pesce, thanks so much for coming in and talking to us.
Thank you.